Hello and welcome to our video lecture. We are going to talk about what happened to the first supply and Captain John Smith. There are several things that we want to talk about the excerpt, what happened to the first supply, and it has something to do with concepts like colonialism, Orientalism, as well as commercialism. So let's get it on. At the beginning of 1600, England started to gain its power. And of course, there's no other way of showing how powerful you are than by acquiring new land. It's like countries telling the whole world that they are powerful enough for them to conquer a new land and call it their own. And so England joined that adventure, and they were able to colonize America or North America by 1607 with the first establishment in Virginia. So before the colonization of North America, of course, a group of people or groups of people were already inhabiting North America. These are what we call now the Native Americans or the American Indians. Of course, when the Englishmen arrived, there was resistance on the part of the Native Americans who would like to be colonized without a fight, who would be willing enough to be colonized by foreigners in their own land. Conflict in between the Englishmen and the Native Americans, and that is one of the problems that John Smith discussed at the beginning of what happened to the first supply. Now, what is this first supply that they were talking about? They traveled from England to America for 4 long months. And the company that commissioned them to be on that journey provided them with enough supplies, with enough food, with enough equipment, with enough resources. There were enough food for their 4 month travel, and there were enough food and supplies for at most a month after they arrived in Virginia. Because you cannot expect these people to discover the land immediately upon arriving, because of course it's a foreign land. They didn't know what they were about to discover in it, so they had to be careful, and they did not immediately build their settlement there, and therefore they still needed enough supply for them to last at least a month. However, there was a problem that John Smith said it was corruption, rooted in corruption by all the other leaders, particularly their president, Captain Maria Wingfield, who, according to John Smith, hoarded all these supplies for his own. So that's when the problem began. And as a good leader, John Smith was the one who initiated that they go on discover and steal supplies from the Indian villages. This is an example of a colonial literature. Colonialism always tells us two sides of the story. First is the side of the people who colonize the land. And the second side is the side of the people who are being colonized, who are the original inhabitants of that land, and how or what they experienced in the hands of the ones who colonized them. Colonialism is a practice of domination, which involves the subjugation of one people to another, according to Stanford Encyclopedia. So naturally, the harmonious relationship between the colonizers or the colonizing people and the colonized people is impossible, because there will be resistance, because these people who colonize a particular another group of people would always force themselves to these people. They would always tell them that we are uh, more superior than you are. Whatever you believe, you have to forget, and whatever we teach you, you have to accept. Whatever we tell you, you have to follow. And of course, the colonized people could not just accept that simply. It is already given that colonizers would see themselves as the ones who are superior than the people that they colonize. Now, if we come to think about it, why wouldn't the Englishmen be more superior than the American Indians? I mean, they have had a very, very long history. You know, they've fought so many wars, they've had so many leaders, they've had very rich history. They have already developed their own language during that time. And if you think about it, of course you would agree that, hey, they're already civilized. They are indeed more superior than the American Indians. And because of that, perhaps we could agree when John Smith referred to these Indians as savages, as ugly, as devil, as grim, as uncivilized. Because these savages, instead of deciding on their own, would consult their gods and the goddesses. They would have their rituals instead of just deciding rationally. Remember when John Smith was captured and was brought to Pamunki, to the village of Pamunki, Opechancanough did not immediately order uh, for his killing, but instead they've had rituals. They consulted their gods and goddesses before Opechancanough finally decided that John Smith had to die. And then, of course, these are people who haven't had exploration experiences compared to John Smith. They didn't have enough technology. That's why everybody was so amazed when John Smith showed them the compass. And he actually explained to these people that the world was round using that compass. And that same compass saved his life when he gave it as a gift to Opechancanough. And then suddenly, Opechancanough somehow changed his mind. So instead of killing John Smith, he said, let's consult other leaders for this man's fate. But then, when we think about it, when we think about the situation or where the Native Americans stand during that time, is it possible then that with his writing, John Smith made us believe that the American Indians were savages, that they were uncivilized people? Now, if we consider it, if we consult our references, there are three signs of civilization. Well, that's according to National Geographic. One, that there should be settlement. Number two, that there should be class structure and government. And number three, there must be things that indicate development in their community. What are these things that indicate the development? Their language, their art, their trade, and their technology. Now, my question to you is, according to John Smith, didn't these Native Americans possess all three criteria to be called civilized people? Let's go through them one by one. When we solely depend on Captain John Smith's words, we can immediately create an image of the Indians being savages and wild. Okay? But from the journal itself, okay, from the words of John Smith himself, we could get a picture of how these Indians were in their society, what kind of society they had during that time. First of all, the Indians had their settlements. They had their settlements. And that is where John Smith and his team actually wanted to go and to steal from their stash. They are not nomads. They settle in one place and they actually had villages. They had larger community. So the first requirement, having a settlement, it's check. There is a settlement. Second, the bowmen, the 300 bowmen who caught John Smith, if the purpose of these bowmen is to kill John Smith, to prevent them from settling in Virginia, they could have killed him right there and then. But they did not. Instead, they captured him and brought him to their leader. That itself proves that this community has social structure. Opechancanough, again, instead of immediately deciding to have him killed, he and the whole community had a consultation, had a ritual to consult their gods and goddesses on John Smith's fate. What is it a sign of? It's a sign of religion. See? It's one of those things that indicate development. They have religion. They even have their own language. Another thing that proves their civilization is the fact that bribery is practiced by the Indian men. When Opechancanough was offered by John Smith this compass, what did he do? He said, okay, I cannot decide for this man's fate. Let's not kill him. I think we need to consult our higher leaders. That's bribery. And that is a sign of trade. You know, you give me something, I give you back your life, or I give you your life. That's trade. And when they brought John Smith from one village to another, and finally they arrived at Huerhuacomoco to their emperor Powhatan, they finally let Powhatan decide on what should they do with John Smith. And who is Powhatan? He is the highest of their leader. And so to what do we compare that? We could compare that to justice system. You know, just like what's happening now. Two neighbors would argue, the barangay would try to settle it. If they can't, they go to municipal trial court, provincial trial court, regional trial court, until they reach Supreme Court and the Court of Appeals. It's the same thing that happened with John Smith in the hands of the Native Americans. So all of these things proved that these are not savages. These are civilized people, just like the Englishmen. So the question now is, who told these Englishmen that they were indeed superior than the Indians, than the Native Americans? So where did that idea come from? In the 70s, one philosopher by the name of Edward Said presented to the world the concept of Orientalism. This Orientalism, according to Said, is something that is rooted from the Western ideology of their somewhat innate superiority over the East, over the Orient. Orientalism somehow serves as the Westerners' license to feel superior over the others. So specifically, According to Orientalism, the Western ideology presents these people as strong, rational, masculine, and civilized. On the other hand, they look at the Orient, the East, as feminine, emotional, weak, and degenerate, uncivilized. Therefore, the representation of the colonized people as the way John Smith did is something that is expected in colonial literary pieces such as What Happened Till the First Supply. But then again, the question is, why did Captain John Smith have to do that? Why did he write the way he wrote What Happened Till the First Supply? Let us talk about the Disney animated film Pocahontas. Um, it used to be, and I believe it is still famous. Children still know it. They still know the story of Pocahontas and John Smith. And if you have watched it, I bet you were moved by the scene when Pocahontas saved John Smith. And as she was explaining to her father why she saves him, she said that she loves John Smith. Diba? It's so kilig. And we love it. People love it for that. Aside from the song and the magical thing that's going on in the movie, everybody fell in love with Pocahontas and John Smith. Let's have a reality check here. In 1607, when John Smith arrived in Virginia, he was already 27 years old. Not too old. However, Pocahontas was around 10 to 13 years old. So if we entertain the idea of John Smith and Pocahontas, hooking up, it's like we're going to have a problem there. If it's a present time, John Smith will really be in trouble. You might say, age is but a number, but I don't think it really happened. I mean, the romantic thing, I could actually challenge you to look for a word or a phrase that would give us a hint of a romantic relationship between John Smith and Pocahontas in What Happened Till the First Supply. I mean, you might find there a word like love, but it wasn't referring to the romantic love that was presented to us by the animated film. So there was a problem, there was a misrepresentation of John Smith and Pocahontas in the movie. First of all, there was misrepresentation as regards the looks, the appearance of Captain John Smith, because he was very good looking in the animated film. But I'm not saying that John Smith in real life wasn't good looking. I mean, he wouldn't appeal to the modern women, I should say, with that kind of look. Second, there was misrepresentation of Pocahontas as regards her age, because in the movie she and John Smith were almost of the same age. But in reality, I mean, historically speaking, Pocahontas was not even in her teens when she saved John Smith. So you might be asking, why, if it wasn't love, what any other reason could Pocahontas had to save John Smith? Well, there are so many reasons that we could entertain. But there was a fact that Pocahontas, she was really known to have high respect and love for nature and life in general. So probably that could have been a reason, that could have been the sole reason why Pocahontas saved John Smith. If Pocahontas and John Smith weren't romantically involved, why did Disney have to project it that way? Analyzing Disney films is going to be a totally different lecture. But for the sake of our discussion, um, before Frozen, before Brave, Disney movies had this certain template that the princesses must have their Prince Charming. Like Snow White had to have the prince, Cinderella had to be rescued by Prince Charming. What else? So was Princess Jasmine had to be rescued by Aladdin. So this is like the template that Disney followed, and they saw that people actually buy that template. That's why their animated films became so famous among children and adults, because they found what appeals to their audience, what sells to their audience. And that's exactly what they did with Pocahontas and John Smith. I mean, who would like to watch a movie that talks about pure history, just like Titanic? Would you prefer watching a dull movie that plainly talks about Titanic, how it was made, and how it sank? Or would you rather watch a movie that talks about the love story that existed between Jack and Rose? It's the same concept. And that's what we call commercialism. Commercialism is a practice of selling something for the sole purpose of profit without, or just having the minimal thought about its quality and its benefit to the market or to the people that buy these things. You could just only imagine how many young people and even adults believed Pocahontas was head over heels with Captain John Smith. Or the thought of Pocahontas instantly learning how to speak in English just because this magical wind and leaves blew, and suddenly she learned English instead of John Smith learning their native language. Well, we all know by now how good of a soldier John Smith was, how experienced he was as a soldier. However, as a writer, he was criticized by many. His credibility was actually questioned when he published his journal, The General History of Virginia. There was the fact that John Smith kept referring to himself in third person. Looking at the good side, this writing style is actually used by some writers to project an objective point of view. Even though he was telling his own story, he wanted to project an objective take on the events. However, other people see this as a sign of his egoistic behavior, more like a narcissist behavior of promoting himself as the captain. It's like looking at himself as another person. For some, it shows his pride. Another thing that made critics question his credibility are some of the things that he told in What Happened Till the First Supply. I don't know if you were amazed or you questioned the existence of the 300 Indian bowmen who attacked him and his colleagues when they were about to sneak into an Indian village. And not only that, you know, he was the only survivor of this attack. 300 bowmen who attacked him, and he was the only survivor from that attack. How did he survive? He grabbed a savage, an Indian, their Indian guide, and tied his body around his body, and that served as his human shield from all the arrows. It cannot be verified. There were no other survivors who could tell and verify that, hey, yes, what he's saying is real. I was there, and he survived, and there were actually 300 bowmen. And how could he have counted how many bowmen attacked them? Because of that, he some critics would actually consider him as an embellisher instead of a writer. In addition, uh, the journal was published years after it happened. This adventure happened in 1607, but then he published his journal in 1624. It was like almost 2 decades of recalling these events. And so chances are he could not have recalled them accurately and objectively. That's what critics tell about John Smith as a writer. As a soldier, there was no question about his skill, his bravery. But as a writer, somewhat like, you know, eh, not very accurate, not very objective kind of writer. So, with all these issues that surround what happened to the first supply, issues of, well, it's a fact that it's an example of a colonial literature, but the concepts of Orientalism, embellishment, commercialism, uh, definitely we could identify a purpose of John Smith for writing what happened to the first supply. There has to be a purpose. It is not only for record keeping because of the fact that he published it. What could have been his purpose? We could think of profit, but let's look beyond that fact. Because whether we like it or not, what happened to the first supply or the general history of Virginia is considered to be, if not the first published journal or literary piece that talks about the English settlement or the start of the English colony in America. So it definitely influenced people during that time. So, what could have been his purpose? Perhaps commercialism still has something to do with it. So, what was he trying to sell? Perhaps he was trying to sell the new world and the idea of people, of Englishmen coming into the new world and considering living there for good. For a settlement to flourish, there has to be people, or else the effort of these first settlers would be useless if there would be no people to let the population grow. And therefore, they needed people to come in, to come to the new world and leave England behind and settle for good permanently in America. But do you think that was an easy job for them? Definitely not. Because who would be in their right mind to leave everything behind to come to a land that is unknown to them? Aside from the information provided to them by Christopher Columbus when he accidentally discovered America and he thought that it was India, people didn't have enough knowledge on North America. And so they needed something or someone who could tell them that, hey, it's safe to live here. It's safe to uh, start your new life in this land. Why? Because I myself experienced it firsthand. I fought these Indian men. I actually won their hearts. That's why they somehow support our settlement in Jamestown. They are now our friends because of what I did. So they needed some kind of a hero, of a figure that they could depend on. With the publication of the General History of Virginia, the Englishmen had an idea on what they can do in the New World when they go settle in it. They already had an idea on what the people before them actually did to ensure their safety and their livelihood when they come and transfer and immigrate to the New World. So, literature can be a very powerful thing. Aside from expressing significant human experiences, it can also be used to gain power, just like what we see in what happened till the first supply. Power for oneself and over others. Hence, literature may also serve its political purpose, just like what we see in this journal of John Smith. Writers use varying styles and approaches to realize their goals in writing. But definitely, they have their goals, their purpose. It may be questionable for others, unacceptable even, but definitely they serve their purpose in writing. So, to summarize, what happened to the first supply is an example of a colonial literature that tells the story and adventures of a character from the colonizing country. Aside from its historical contribution, it has also contributed to the success, okay, of establishing the English colony in North America. So, what have you learned? What are the things that you have realized through this literary piece? The assessment for this module will be opened soon, so don't forget to accomplish that before the due date. So thank you very much for joining me. I'll see you all again for another video lecture. I'm Lourdes Rudio. Thank you and God bless.